Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Now grab yourself a cup of tea and let's talk some boxing. Now let's talk about Dillian Whyte and what his next move might be. Eddie Hearn was asked about this in a recent interview, but he only really spoke about the Deontay Wilder fight and how interesting that would be for Dillian Whyte. Now of course that cannot happen next because Wilder is fighting Tyson Fury for the WBC championship, leaving Dillian Whyte looking for an opponent. Now of course the ultimate goal is to get a WBC world title opportunity at the winner of that fight, whoever that might be, in probably 2022 now. So for the remainder of the year, he needs to find one, maybe two opponents to face in the meantime, because Eddie Hearn did explain that Dillian Whyte would like to get out 3 times this year, once with Povetkin in March, and maybe one more time in the summer, then probably around December. So that could be interesting for Dillian Whyte, but as to who those opponents might be, we haven't really been given any names. I mean, Eddie Hearn did speak about taking Dillian Whyte to the US, and that could present some possibilities, maybe a Ruiz fight, maybe a Luis Ortiz fight, but I'm thinking with Luis Ortiz, he could still get an opportunity at AJ, maybe Tyson Fury, maybe Deontay Wilder, so I wouldn't imagine he's going to risk it against someone like Dillian Whyte. He might do, and that would be a good fight. But Luis Ortiz is one of those names who gets mentioned when, say, Tyson Fury needs to fight AJ or Deontay Wilder. So he is in that good position where he can almost get a world title opportunity quite quickly. But still, I'm sure that Eddie Hearn and Dillian Whyte could put a package together that might tempt Luis Ortiz. A good payday in America might be a good deal for him. But in that interview where Eddie Hearn was asked about Dillian Whyte, he said that it's possible that he could now fight in the UK, and it is looking more unlikely that he will travel to the US. So if he is going to remain in the UK, which isn't confirmed but it is seeming more likely now, then who could he face? Could they still put together Luis Ortiz? That's possible, but I'm not entirely convinced that Luis Ortiz would come to the UK to do that. I would imagine if that were to happen, it would be in the US. Same goes for Ruiz, I would imagine, as well. I mean, there's Joseph Parker around there who apparently is having surgery on his elbow, so he will be out for a while. Maybe not a lengthy period, but perhaps that does put him out of a potential Dillian Whyte rematch. There is Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce would be a good fight for Dillian Whyte. Joe Joyce is in a good position with the WBO being ranked number 2, and depending on what happens with Anthony Joshua and Usyk, he could still get a vacant world title opportunity, although I fully expect AJ and Usyk to be made, meaning that Joe Joyce will be still ranked number 2, but won't have his world title opportunity. So we'll be looking for a fight. I mean, he's been on hold just as much as AJ, Usyk and Tyson Fury in the period that they tried to make Undisputed, because he was waiting to see if he could get a shot with Usyk at an interim title, which then he would be upgraded to world champion after Undisputed. Now of course that is no longer happening. So that does also leave Joe Joyce in a situation where he's looking for an opponent, and his time has been wasted in some ways, I guess. I mean, he could have had a fight by now. He did fight Daniel Dubois in November, so there has been some inactivity for Joe Joyce in waiting for a potential Alexander Usyk fight, which never came to fruition as of yet. I mean, it still could do, but it is highly unlikely because the AJ versus Usyk fight seems to be the next one for AJ and for Usyk. So he needs an opponent, Dillian Whyte needs an opponent. It is a risky fight for both, so that is what probably makes it unlikely, but still, it would be a good fight if that is something that they could put together, but I don't see it happening given that Joe Joyce is in quite a good position with the WBO, and Dillian Whyte, I mean, we could say he's in a good position with the WBC being interim champion and potentially going to get a world title opportunity next year. But given the treatment from the WBC towards Dillian Whyte, do we honestly really believe that he's going to get his chance? I mean, we can hope, because I do believe that Dillian Whyte does deserve a world title opportunity, more so than anyone else in the heavyweight division. Any other challenger, Dillian Whyte has done more to prove himself and to get himself to that position. He's taken the risky fights continuously back to back. Now it is time for him to get his world title opportunity, and I don't think that anyone should come before him. I mean, if Alexander Usyk hadn't moved up to heavyweight, then he would likely have fought Anthony Joshua already, because he would be mandatory to that WBO world title. And obviously, Usyk had the Witherspoon fight, and he obviously had the Derek Chisora fight as well. And Dillian Whyte would likely have gone straight for an AJ world title opportunity. So that fight could have happened already if Usyk did not move up, because Dillian Whyte was ranked number 1 by the WBO. But then obviously with Usyk coming up, he was WBO champion in the cruiserweight division. There is that rule of being champion in a lower weight class and becoming immediately a mandatory to a champion in the higher weight class when they move up. That happened with Alexander Usyk, meaning that Dillian Whyte was pushed aside, I guess. I mean, it is a rule that has been there, and it's not like the treatment Dillian Whyte has gotten from the WBC, which is where Dillian Whyte has been mandatory or number 1 for like 1,000 days, yet still not gotten a world title opportunity. Even being number 1, then when a mandatory was called, it was Dominic Breazeale and not him. So if we look at it from a Dillian Whyte's point of view, you have to think that he's going to be considering his options, because if he sticks with the WBC and remains loyal, is he 100% sure he's going to get his opportunity? If he is, then great. But if not, would he not be eyeing up his options with an IBF possible opportunity and WBO possible opportunity? I mean, the WBO did have that situation where they were going to order Joe Joyce versus Usyk for the interim title, and now Joe Joyce doesn't have a fight. That could be interesting, because if Dillian Whyte were to vacate the WBC interim world title, he could then be ranked by the IBF and by the WBO and the WBA, which he is not at the moment because he carries that WBC interim title. Would we believe that he could slot in high enough to get a chance at Joe Joyce, then potentially be called as mandatory later down the line? I mean, I know the WBO mandatory is being dealt with now, but given the situation with the WBC, how long is it going to be before they give him the opportunity? Same applies with the IBF. The IBF are currently putting together an eliminator to determine who Anthony Joshua's next mandatory is for that IBF belt, even though he's just dealt with him in Kubrat Pulev. He's just dealt with his IBF mandatory, and they're already lining up the next one. You can see why AJ gets a little bit fed up with being governed by these organizations, because obviously there is already another mandatory in the line waiting for an opportunity at AJ. I mean, it could be Hrgovic or it could be someone else, whoever wins that eliminator. I mean, that is the situation with the IBF. Filip Hrgovic gets that eliminator, but he hasn't got an opponent for that eliminator, so if Dillian Whyte were to vacate the WBC interim status, then he would be ranked by the IBF. He would have to, because he is clearly a top 5 heavyweight in the world. So then he could fight Hrgovic, and then he's in a good position, if he were to win, to become Anthony Joshua's next mandatory with that governing body. Yes, it's going to take a while because the IBF mandatory was just dealt with. Same if he goes with the WBO. The WBO mandatory is being dealt with now, but again, look how long he's waited with the WBC and how much longer he might have to wait, given he is not currently called as mandatory to Tyson Fury. And the interesting thing about that is Eddie Hearn gave us some insight into that situation. He said that Dillian Whyte was going to be mandatory this year had he beat Alexander Povetkin. Now that did not happen, Povetkin won. For a brief moment, albeit not publicly, Povetkin was mandatory to Tyson Fury, but he was contractually obligated to give Dillian Whyte a rematch. Now the rematch clause was activated by Dillian Whyte, so the rematch was on. Then Dillian Whyte won, but he never became mandatory then to Tyson Fury, and he still isn't. He is WBC interim world champion, but he is not mandatory to the WBC champ. Leaving Dillian Whyte with perhaps a tough decision to make and questions to be asked about what governing body he wants to put his stock in, given the treatment from the WBC. If they give him his chance, then great, but if they don't, then you have to wonder how much longer he will remain loyal to that governing body. Anyway, guys, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on Dillian Whyte and his next move? Do you think that it could be someone like maybe Andy Ruiz? Perhaps that was the fight they were looking to set up had he gone to America, and that still could happen. Maybe Luis Ortiz, but it is looking more likely that Dillian Whyte will fight in the UK next, and there could be opponents out there like maybe a Charles Martin. I mean, Charles Martin is not a world beater, but still, it is a fight that keeps Dillian Whyte active. And especially given his situation, he does need to be looking for his opportunity, and I do believe that he's in a position where he has earned that. And in addition to that, there is a fight maybe with Joe Joyce, a big UK showdown. That could happen as well. Plenty of possibilities for Dillian Whyte. One interesting thing is we have Daniel Dubois versus Bogdan Dinu, and we'll have to see the result of that. But when they were putting together that Matchroom versus Queensberry kind of poster thing, they pitted Dillian Whyte against Daniel Dubois. Now that could be interesting. Would they still be interested in doing Dillian Whyte versus Dubois? Not necessarily the best move for Dubois, but a brilliant move for Dillian Whyte because they have expressed interest in that fight before, and he will be WBA interim world champion if he is to beat Bogdan Dinu. So look what a fight with Daniel Dubois could do for Dillian Whyte. Now that could be an interesting avenue they can explore. Anyway guys, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also leave a like and grab that subscribe button. Thanks guys.